In this video, we're going to be using the prone 3-month developmental position to address several problems that can present to the clinic. Conditions such as chronic neck problems, shoulder issues, scapular instability, issues dealing with posture of the thoracic spine, either being accentuated thoracic curvature or a flattened dish T-spine, as well as issues related to the pelvis and the lower back. Before we get up into the active exercise point, it's really important that we learn to establish the initial position and our points of support. We're going to go through each one of these step by step to make sure you're able to create an ideal exercise. Okay. In the prone 3-month developmental position, the base of support occurs in the front part of the pelvis on the symphysis pubis, as well as the inside of both elbows. So we're going to begin by establishing a neutral pelvic position to create ideal support. Now, before we create a change in the pelvis, you have to be able to move from a point of stability. So we're going to create activation of the abdominal cylinder. I'm just going to place my fingers into the side of the abdominal wall, and she's going to push out against my fingers using the diaphragm to generate intra-abdominal pressure. And I want to feel that pressurization, that activation 360 degrees around the abdominal cylinder, in the front, in the sides, and in the back portion of the abdominal wall as well. Now from there, she's going to begin to pull the pelvis into its neutral position by trying to pull the tailbone down towards her heels. She's not going to be using glute activation to do this, so we don't want to see gripping of the gluteal muscles that commonly create hip problems that we see so much in the clinic. So the glute muscles stay relaxed, the hamstrings and the inner thigh, the adductor muscles also need to remain relatively relaxed as well. So pelvic positioning is coming from the abdominal wall and pressurization of the abdominal cylinder. As the pelvis is rotating backwards, the lumbar spine is going to be brought into a more neutral, more correct position as well. So the spinous processes are going to begin to fan open, and we're going to see a straightening, a pulling open of the lumbar spine, bringing it to its neutral position. So we establish lower body support. Now we move up to the upper extremities. And as I mentioned, the base of support from the upper extremities is on the inside of the elbows. Ideally, we want the crease of the elbows to be about the same level as the ear. So her arms are a little high. We're just going to slide them back just a little bit. So now the crease is sitting correctly. And we also want to make sure that the wrist is in line with the shoulder joint so that the elbow isn't too open or too closed. So if we can create that ideal alignment, next we're going to position the shoulder joint itself. Typically, people who tend to have a lot of dominance in their pec muscles or their lats, their shoulder tends to sit in an internally rotated position. Now this is going to make the ball of the shoulder joint sit in the front of the socket. That's a decentrated, unstable, inefficient position to be in. So we want a centrated, a neutral position of the shoulder joint. So she's going to attempt to rotate the arm backwards, an external rotation of the arm in the socket backwards like this. That's going to help her to load the elbow better. She's going to centrate her shoulder joint. We're going to keep the shoulder girdle away from the ear. Now, another strategy people will tend to use is overactivation of the lat. The lat is not part of the stabilizing mechanism for this exercise, so we don't want overactivation of the lat. So instead, we are using the entire shoulder girdle, really focusing on the middle, the lower trapezius, to create a more neutral position of the shoulder blade. So another common issue is overactivation of the upper trapezius. And that quite commonly is involved when the pectoral muscles are also overactivated. And when you get the upper trap overactivated and the pec overactivated, again, we get this upward migration of the shoulder girdle, that internal rotation of the shoulder joints. So what she's going to be doing is creating a spreading across the chest and across the shoulders, reaching down the shaft of her arm into the elbow. So if I was to place my finger here, she's reaching down into my finger and lightly pressing the inside of the elbow into the table at the same time. Now, when people are doing this, they will also tend to create a little bit of overactivation here. So we want that shoulder blade to stay away from the ear, reaching down into the arm, keeping the shoulder blade away. So as she's reaching, that important stabilizer, the serratus anterior, is activating, creating that pull through the shoulder blade down to the arm. So now we're setting the support through the arm. Lastly is going to be head position. And the correct position for the head is at the very top of the forehead. So by creating a little bit of a chin tuck, we're going to be activating the deep neck flexors, which are very important stabilizers of the neck. So we're creating all this pre-activation, stabilization of the entire chain from the pubic bone all the way up into the head, through the shoulder girdles and to the elbow. Now, the ideal movement that we're going to be creating is an uprighting of the upper thoracic spine and the neck, not by creating cervical extension. Instead, it's going to be maintain that cervical flexion, but lifting the head towards the ceiling. We never want to see this type of movement, because that tends to create a lot of issues in through the lower cervical, mid-cervical spine, C5, C6, where we typically see a lot of osteoarthritis and disc degeneration in the cervical spine. So instead, it's going to be pulling the head forward, kind of like a turtle poking its head out of its shell while she's lifting the back of the head towards the ceiling like that, and always maintaining that chin tuck. Go ahead and bring your head back down. So what's occurring when we're doing this is, as she's trying to lift, she's always going to be pulling all the muscles in the shoulder girdle. The entire core is going to be pulling towards their points of support. And if we look specifically at the shoulder girdle, we have the middle trapezius, the rhomboids, the lower trapezius are all pulling from the spine towards the shoulder blade, from the shoulder blade down towards the elbow. So people who tend to have a flat back or an accentuated curvature, we can use that activation to try and normalize that. We're going to go through that in more detail when she's up in the right position. So these abdominal cylinder, pressurization, bearing through the pubic bone, bearing through the elbows, reaching, separating, spreading the whole time, and then she begins to lift. And with my fingers on T4, T5, as she's lifting, I want to feel this part of the spine lifting into my fingers, and she's doing it very well, watching to make sure we're not getting overactivation of the upper trap, the hollowing in through the neck. We want to watch all that. Next, we want to see multi-segmental extension occurring from the top of the sacrum through the entire spine all the way up to the top. So every segment is participating in the thoracic spine as she comes up. So chin tucking, pulling forward, support through the elbows, support through the pubic bone, maintaining that pressurization, and lifting and really getting that stabilization of the entire shoulder girdle. Very good. And now she's just going to maintain that position and breathe, really focusing on breathing through the entire abdominal cylinder. And while she's doing that, she's also focusing, making sure the shoulders stay down, everything stays spread, reaching into the elbows, keeping that ideal position on the pubic bone, not gripping with the glutes, not gripping with her hamstrings. 10, 12, 15 good breaths, and then she'll lower herself back down. Now, for some people, they might find being down in that prone position flat on the table just simply too difficult to create a proper pattern. Usually it's because the thoracic spine there's just too much curvature, it's too stiff, and they can't upright themselves correctly. So we can also use a low kneeling, or in some people will call it a child's pose position, to create the same type of patterns. Now, another problem we typically see is people might tend to have too much curvature in the lower back, and the pelvis really wants to sit in that anterior tilt. When we try and control this and try and control this and the head, there's just too much going on. So what we can do is allow the pelvis to sit back like this, and as she's moving her body this way, the pelvis will naturally begin to rotate backwards. The pelvis will move into its more natural position, and the lumbar spine will also go into its natural position as well. One less thing to battle with. So going back to the thoracic spine, the idea with the arms is the same as we did previously. The elbows are out to the side a little bit, the hands are in a little, the wrists are about the same width as the shoulder joints. We're creating the same activation through the abdominal wall. Now we can accentuate this a little bit now by pressing the shins into the table. As soon as those shins press down, there's a little bit more uprighting through the entire spine. So we're going to take advantage of the legs to help with the exercise. So she's going to be pressing her shins into the table, and the whole time now she's going to be pulling her coccyx, her tailbone, down towards her heel. I'm going to make sure we have that ideal pressurization through the cylinder. We want to keep the shoulders away from the ears, so we're pulling them back, opening up through the chest, spreading through the chest and the shoulders. We want nice width, and then she's going to pull the back of her head towards the ceiling. And while she's pulling the tailbone this way, she's also going to be pulling her head that way, creating a lengthening of the spine. Now, as we mentioned, people who have alterations in the normal curvature of the thoracic spine, we can use this exercise to help correct that. So let's say Lana was someone who had too much curvature in her upper back. Now, with the too much curvature, the spine tends to sit higher than the shoulder blades. We're going to be using the activation of the rhomboids, the middle trap, and the lower trap that's pulling towards the shoulder blade to take that accentuated thoracic curvature and pull it down towards the shoulder blade. And the opposite of that would people who are dished, really flat in the thoracic spine. Now we're going to be using those same muscles pulling towards the shoulder blade to lift the spine towards the shoulder blades. We're creating ideal postural positioning of the thoracic spine, and at the same time we're pulling the rib cage up to the shoulder blade. So people who have shoulder instabilities, people have winging shoulder blades, by creating a full body activation, we're going to be dealing with those patterns as well. So let's go back to the beginning. The tailbone pulls down towards the heels, shins press into the table. We activate that abdominal cylinder, ideal pressurization. She's supporting through her elbows, lifting the head up towards the ceiling. We're not pushing the arms into the table. You're just feeling your support, and from that support, you're lifting the head to bring the thoracic spine into its ideal position and trying to go as long as possible, and the whole time breathing correctly in through the cylinder. And there you have it. We have both the prone 3-month developmental position, the low kneeling developmental position, to create uprighting of the spine. Ideal shoulder position. Give it a try. Thank you.